Hello everyone, and welcome to Stock Talks presented by Small Cap Millionaires. We are starting a new crypto channel, so this is the first interview about it. In this podcast or in this YouTube channel, wherever you're watching, we would be doing bunch of stuffs regarding small cap stocks as well as bitcoins, ether, and other cryptos. So let's start today. So we have a guest today, and I'll first do some ask the guest to introduce himself, and then we can go from there. So hi Bill, how is it going?
Hey Harry, doing great. How are you?
I'm good. So can you just give a short introduction of yourself for our listeners?
Sure. Harry, I've been in the investment business for about 20 years, before doing some other things in academia, and but just love to sort of share, thoughts and ideas that I've had over the 20 years experience, working and sort of running a brokerage firm and working with clients and so forth. And so that's the idea behind Small Cap Millionaires, was to share the ideas that we have sort of accumulated over a lifetime of investing, and share them with the audience now through the Small Cap Millionaire site and podcast. So appreciate the opportunity today to chat with you.
That's great, Bill. And I'm happy to host you. So we are talking about bitcoins today. So how did you start your Bitcoin or crypto journey?
Yeah, so for me, it was an interesting, was probably about 4 years ago. I started looking at fintech, sort of broadly speaking, in terms of what's the impact on fintech to the financial services industry, and and so got into looking at blockchain specifically, looking at sort of what Don Tapscott was doing at his organization, the blockchain organization, and a number of sort of blockchain groups, and then came across Bitcoin, through that process. Obviously, Bitcoin is fundamentally principled around blockchain technology. So that's kind of how I got started, and it's been kind of an interesting journey over the last 4 years, that's for sure.
So, just for our listeners who would not be aware, it would be very rare right now. But if someone is not aware of Bitcoin, just a quick introduction of what Bitcoin is.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, what Bitcoin is, without getting sort of too technical into the weeds, is essentially a cashless. The idea was a cashless society, or a cashless mechanism to be able to exchange value utilizing a blockchain type of framework. And a blockchain framework allows you to put transactions on a ledger and transfer value. I'll just describe it as transfer value. And so Bitcoin was kind of the first demonstration of that, like in 2009. There was a white paper released by the infamous Satoshi Nakamoto, and introduced this concept. And so there was some early adopters, and sort of the origin of Bitcoin began. But essentially, Bitcoin went from being sort of this oddity that only sort of coders and developers sort of knew about, or people in that crypto space sort of knew about, to now becoming sort of what some describe as a store of value, a different asset class, a different asset, sort of non-correlated to the regular capital market. So it's interesting to sort of see its evolution from an oddity, to now, people are viewing it as a store of value. So
That's excellent, Bills. And just to add on my thoughts, so Bitcoin started as a cyberpunk movement. So it was started like after the 2008 crisis when everyone saw what Wall Street and banks did, and the whole economy came tumbling down. So this was like Bitcoin has a lot of narratives to it. So initial narrative is like this is a currency no one can control, it's decentralized. Then the narrative shifted over the years that okay, it's a currency, but the technology that it has, blockchain has a lot of value there. So you can build smart contracts on it, you can do bunch of other stuff with that. And now the narrative is evolving that Bitcoin is a store of value because Satoshi, like, he created limited amount of bitcoins, plus it has a, like, it, the supply of bitcoins keeps on falling. There is something called as a halving cycle. So in each halving cycle the supply goes down. So effectively it is capped at 21 million and the supply also starts falling. So the narrative right now, at least in the investment community, is that it is kind of a digital gold. It's not like a rock, but it is kind of a digital gold that has limited supply, and it can be treated like it, like you said, it has like it is not much correlated with the traditional financial instruments like stocks and bonds. So adding it has some value in terms of portfolio allocation. So that's nice, Bill. So what are the risks while investing in Bitcoin? So let's start with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great question, but ultimately the risk of whether it's Bitcoin or it's a large cap stock or a small cap stock or anything that you're investing in, there's always risk, right? There's always and it becomes a question of how much risk, relative to the sort of I call it sort of the historical sort of action of the asset. So um, and so Bitcoin right now, because it's still a fairly new phenomenon, and there's in some sense there's maybe risks that are sort of unknown. It's not very familiar. It's still very early in the adoption cycle. I think there's a lot of volatility, to the asset, and so individuals who um, don't want a lot of volatility in their portfolio, and don't sort of understand the underlying mechanism of Bitcoin and blockchain and what this asset class is all about, I think have a lot of risk. So it's kind of risk in terms of liquidity risk, it's risk in terms of volatility risk, and it's risk in terms of not understanding what you're investing in. So there's a lot of sort of different risks, and then there's maybe some regulatory risk that we haven't quite seen yet. There's potentially technological risks. So there's a lot of risks sort of lurking out there, Harry. And I always say to investors, I don't want to undermine any risk. But that goes to the issue of what I call exposure, right? So you can take some risks on whatever you want to invest in, and if the exposure is very small, relative to your net worth, you're probably fine, to take on some of those risks and sort of see where it goes. So I think the question is more one of portfolio management, risk allocation in your individual portfolio, but just appreciate that there's still some unknowns relative to Bitcoin.
That's excellent, Bill. And just to add my bits to it, so I look at it from different angles. So Bitcoin is narrative driven, which narratives can change anytime. So that's a risk that you're always facing. So maybe the narrative shifts from Bitcoin to Ether or to some other currency. So that's also there. The second thing that Bitcoin has is it has very high hash rates, and because it has so much hash rate, it has a lot of energy consumption. And in this world where we are talking like so sensitively about climate change and about energy consumptions and about monitoring that, so that's a risk that Bitcoin faces. Like it has to either change its consensus mechanism, which the community is trying to do, or to use energy in a very efficient way, either use stranded gas assets or use solar, wind, and nuclear and move to renewables. So that's one major hit point. And like what you said, it's very volatile. Volatility is good or bad. You can, like, if you over invest in it, the volatility can actually be a threat. But if you're under invested, it is like a kicker to your portfolio, then volatility can actually be good for you. So it depends on what your perspectives are. But like that being said, like you suggested, the portfolio allocations are key here, and Fidelity actually did a study about it. So if you see, Bitcoin is not correlated much with, let's say, gold or even S&P 500 like equities. So correlations are quite low. So you might have noticed the market goes up or goes down, Bitcoin does its own thing. It is its own animal. The second, if you like, they did a lot of studies where they allocated different proportions of Bitcoin. So allocation that they studied, like you can see the chart, I'll put the charts in editing. But if you see the charts, like 0% allocation, 1% allocation, 2% and 3%. So they should show like small allocation of 1 to 3% of crypto, not only Bitcoin, crypto, it actually increases your Sharpe ratio. So the it reduces the risk of portfolio, and it actually improves the returns of your portfolio. So that is also something that you can look at. And one major factor that's happening with Bitcoin, the volatility is coming down, right? As the asset matures, as the thing matures, the volatility actually comes down. So that also is a factor that investors or listeners can look at and study it little further. Now, Bill, there is a big narrative that Bitcoin has a lot of network effect and it is like internet adoption. So, can you just share your thoughts on what network effect means and like how is it getting adopted?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, when you look at sort of these broad sort of network effects, Bitcoin, the adoption is moving, I think at a fairly alarming rate, like broad scale adoption. I mean, I look at it 2 years ago, Harry, and if you were to talk to somebody, you wouldn't, and you said, hey, are you investing in Bitcoin? Or are you investing in crypto? The answer would be, what are you even talking about, right? And so today, if you ask the same person, hey, are you investing in crypto? They might say, no, I'm not, but they're familiar with it, right? And so that familiarity in crypto assets overall and blockchain technology overall is certainly got widespread use and adoption and further adoption, and I think it's just going to grow. I look at sort of what I was on a conference call here a while ago with the Winklevoss brothers and it's called Nine Partners Capital Asset Management, and discussing sort of the future of Bitcoin as an investment, and how institutional investors are really starting to adopt it. You look at guys like Mark Cuban, putting in and Elon Musk putting Bitcoin into their personal portfolios, and even into their corporate portfolios. So I think I think it's going to continue to grow. I think you're going to see sort of wider spread, and then I think as a lot of these trading platforms make it easier for people to acquire Bitcoin, I think that's going to make a huge difference, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's people invest in what's easy and comfortable for them. I see a number of ETFs, exchange traded funds coming out around Bitcoin, and who knows, maybe down the road you'll even see the traditional mutual fund industry starting to hold some of these assets in some portfolios. So yeah, broadly speaking, I think that sort of wider spread adoption is going to happen. And then you just look at the younger community. I mean, the younger people in school that are in 18, 20, 21, the early emerging business students, they all have crypto in their portfolios, right? They all have a wallet, and they all have hold crypto, or most of them, right? So, or many of them. So I think they're going to sort of take the bull by the horns on this, and it's got a lot of room to run, Harry.
That's great, Bill. And like, I'm like, if you see the chart that is put up in the screen, so Bitcoin is very analogous to internet. So if you see in the internet's journey of adoption, it happened at an exponential pace. So there is a law called as Metcalfe's law that shows that any time you add on to a user into a network, the value of that network increases multifold, or like it is a square of the nodes that are there in the network. But not being more technical, but if you see adoptions of Bitcoin versus internet, we are in 1997. In terms of internet had 130 million users in 1997. Bitcoin's wallet count as of January, so it may have increased a bit, but as of January was around 135 million. So if you see analogy wise, Bitcoin is at 1997 in terms of internet. But after that, after 1997, after the dot com bubble burst, right, the internet adoption exploded globally. So I'm not saying that might like the same thing might happen with Bitcoin, but the adoption curves of Bitcoin are increasing a lot, like Bill said. So that's a very good point with Bill, about Bill. Bill, what's next for this space? So what do you think is going to happen here on?
Yeah, it's hard to predict these things, Cherry, like where this goes, but I've been sort of investing for, many years, right? And so you get kind of a bit of a feel for things, and ultimately investments kind of come down to utility use, right? And so people buy what they need, and a lot of times they buy what they want, but in the end they buy what they need, what things that have utility value, right? So I look at Bitcoin's a unique animal. If the world if people in the world view the sovereigns, and I'll just say the US, the Fed, US government, as sort of this inflationary machine where they keep printing money, then and they've been the reserve currency of the world, right? So if they keep printing money and sort of devaluing their currency, and we have sort of another major economic um, incident, like what happened in sort of 2008, people are going to look to alternative asset classes and alternative forms of, I'll just call it alternative forms of money, and the exchange of value in a different way. So I think there's this notion out there that this younger generation is as comfortable with this other form of, I'll call it digital currency, as they are with a US dollar or a Canadian dollar, right? So I think it has legs, especially for the next generation. I think it even has more legs. Um, how far it goes, how far Bitcoin goes, um, you know, that's anybody's sort of guess. But I think you want to probably have a little bit of, I know for myself, a little bit of exposure. I'm not overly exposed into the sector, but I do have a little bit. Yeah, I have to, I appreciate having some skin in the game, but you have to sort of temper that with reasonable expectations and expectations that are right for you. Uh, I'm as excited about blockchain, the technology, the underlying technology for Bitcoin. I think in that space there is just an enormous opportunity. Whether that's private blockchains, for principally corporate use, to increase efficiency of supply chain, transaction costs, elimination of a lot of sort of, I'll call it, intermediary fees. Blockchain is really starting to take off as a technology. If you look at sort of Hyperledger projects and so forth, um, I think Ethereum, what they're doing with their smart contract, their ERC-20 protocol, I think sort of sky's the limit. I think there's a lot of innovation going on in that space right now. Decentralized finance, huge innovation going on in that space. Where it all goes, don't know, Harry, but I think does it become the next internet? I don't know that you can draw that exact correlation, but I think um, if you have a technology that disintermediates and lowers fees and makes things more efficient, I think people are going to use it, and that's ultimately what blockchain is. So I'm looking at blockchain. I'm looking at Bitcoin. I'm looking at Ether, the other coins. But I always get down to, Harry. I get down to utility value. Where's the utility value, and do I understand what I'm actually investing in? And when it comes to this technology, you have to get down to, you have to understand the code. What am I investing in? What is the underlying value and utility value of the particular coin, so, or token, or blockchain company that you're interested in. So hopefully that answered your, long-winded, but hopefully it answered your question.
No, that's great, Bill. Like, and just to add my views on it, so you can look at it from bunch of angles. So Bitcoin, pure price wise. So if you see, Bitcoin has a very nice stuff thing about it, that it has something called as the halving cycle. So every 4 years, the supply of Bitcoin shrinks. Now there is like added impetus to that supply shrinkage. So if you see the supply of Bitcoin right now on exchanges, on different trading platforms, the supply has fallen through the roof. like fall means fallen under the ground right now. The supply isn't there because big holders are just whatever supply comes in from miners, they're just gobbling it up, and miners are not selling their supply even. So there is a big supply constraint right now on Bitcoin. So that is aiding the price rise of Bitcoin. And if you just compare it to the last halving cycle, right? So if I have put up a chart there. So if you draw analogies from last halving cycle to this halving cycle, and I'm not saying this is going to happen because each halving cycle is its own animal, right? It is driven by its own narratives. But if you draw analogies to that halving cycle, so Bitcoin's peak happened in the last halving cycle somewhere around $20,000. So if you exponentially draw the same parallel lines, that comes to somewhere around 350 to $400,000 in this cycle. That could be where Bitcoin establishes its peak. So that is something to be cognizant about. Supply shrinking, Bitcoin's like compared to last halving cycle, that is where peak is. So that's about price. But if you see the technology that Bitcoin has, the Bitcoin like blockchain, it has a lot of potential. So there is Lightning Labs that is creating layer 2 of Bitcoin, that is creating decentralized applications for Bitcoin, decentralized finance applications for Bitcoin, and just making the transfer of Bitcoins easy and less costly. Then there is Ether, that like Bill you said, ERC20 is there, Ether 2.0 is coming. There are a bunch of decentralized protocols like Aave, Uniswap, and bunch of other things that are trying to create programmed finance, which has a lot of potential because it globalizes finance, and finance hasn't become digital. We are still doing it the old way. So probably this changes the world in the right direction, or it may not. We don't know that. So that is something that you have to be cognizant about. Now,
Yeah,
Bill,
there's a
as
lot
it
of political, Harry, there's a lot of political um, push and pull right now.
yeah,
And when I say political, I'm also layering in sort of the regulatory side of things, the push and pull on that side. So, it'll be interesting to see how far the political environment and the regulatory environment allow this disintermediation to occur. There's a lot at stake for a lot of these. If you think of the banking industry, the global banking industry, and the fees that they exact from clients. If clients can lend directly with pools of capital at much lower interest rates and no fees in terms of transactional fee, um, and all done through very efficient smart contracts. That is game changing stuff, right? And
yeah,
so it'll be interesting to see how. And that's what first I'll be honest with you, when I first started looking at blockchain, because I come from a finance background, right? I actually said to myself, well, this can't be true. This can't be true, and I was in a bit of denial initially because it is potentially so disruptive in what the technology potentially can do. So we'll see where it goes, but I think there's going to be a lot of huge interest in looking at companies that are doing a lot of really interesting work in the space. So us included, right? We're interested in looking, and we're always sort of scoping out what we think is the next big story. So
that's right, Bill. Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes
that's right.
years to build it. So hopefully it is a new Rome. Now, you're also an educator and also have been an advisor for a long time. So, what would you suggest for a young individual, like maybe he's a student, a learner, or starting his advising journey? So, what would you suggest for them, like about this space? Because this
Yeah.
space is right now bonkers. So, you have Bitcoin, you have Ether, you have NFTs, you have decentralized finance, you have 1500 plus tokens. So how does a young advisor start here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've always through my whole career, I've sort of taken a continuous learning path. I've been involved in a number of different careers and different things, but I've never stopped learning. And that's always been sort of my strength and a great advantage, right? And so I would say to anybody, young person, to you in a great spot because if you have sort of that continuous learning mindset, This is just such a fascinating and interesting area to explore. And even for myself, I'll be honest with you, Harry, I wanted to learn and continue to learn more even about the space. And so I've sort of embarked on sort of a blockchain architecture program to get a much more detailed understanding of the code, of the architecture of how blockchain works, where you can apply it. So a real deep granular level of sort of the functionality of the technology and the platforms, right? And so that's me, and I'm an old guy, Harry, right? So and I'm still learning. So I would say generally, that's it. Never lose the spark to learn. It was interesting. I listened to Mark Cuban, that video you sent me on Mark Cuban's video, and he was taking a programming course. He was doing some programming with Solidity, right? Because he wanted to understand more about how smart contracts actually worked, right? The coding around it, and Solidity's the platform for Ethereum and programming language, right? So so even guys like Mark Cuban, right? Multi-billionaire, very successful, but he has to understand what he's investing in. He's a major shareholder in Avi, or a holder of Avi, and so he's learning, right? And he's a continuous learner. Bill Gates, same thing. These guys all just continue to learn. So I think that's the lesson, Harry. Is doesn't matter where you are in the journey. Let the journey be guided by the thirst for knowledge, and you'll go a long way with that.
Exactly, Bill. Means well said. Like learning should never stop, and especially this crypto space. Like it's a rabbit hole. Once you start understanding it, once you have start having fun with it, then like there is no end to what you can do, what you can learn, and how you can network. And the community is very open. They are like they believe in decentralization. They believe in putting their work out there, so you can read bunch of white papers that you are interested about, and it's an amazing space to be in. So just to
Yeah,
end with
yeah, I
with
think that's critical, Harry,
yeah,
because I think to understand where you're going to put capital, like what you're going to put money into, I I I believe you really need to understand and have a good technological basis for your decision making, and understand the utility value of the technology that you're investing in. And who's going to use it, how are they going to pay for it, what are the fees associated with it, who makes money off it. You really have to get down to, as much as you do in any stock, when you look at the fundamentals of this game are understanding the technology itself and the use case around the technology. And so you really got to get under the hood, and you do that by learning as much as you can about the underlying technology. And once you get it, once you kind of get that, and it didn't take me all that long, a lot of the stuff makes sense, or you can quickly see where it doesn't make sense, where you just go, you know what, this isn't, there's no utility value here, this doesn't make sense. And so we stay away from that, right? So there's a lot of hot money in the space right now, Harry. There's a lot of promote, and so you really have to do your homework to make sure you're making good decisions, and that you're investing in things that have long-term utility value to the market. That's crucial.
so like you said, Bill, there are Amazons, there are pet.coms too. So you have to really
Yes.
distinguish between which is
Yeah.
Amazon, which makes sense, and which is the next pet.com just that is just going to sink money. So you have to be
Yeah.
really careful in this space.
Yeah, and for us, we're looking at what I call sort of picks and shovels, right? What's the infrastructure that will be around for a while? Because the infrastructure is what's needed to make sort of the overall system work. And so that's where we're sort of spending more of our time, energy, and effort. And whether we buy it as a stock, as an individual stock, or we buy it as a token, there's lots of different ways to take a position in these things. But I think that's kind of where we're focusing our time and energy.
That's great, Bill. So just to close it off, your favorite Bitcoin quote or a meme.
Yeah. So I had a couple. I was just kind of looking at my note here, Harry, on that question. Um, and this is by Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum. Um, and basically, he's what he's saying is blockchain will make the middleman obsolete. And I think that pretty much sums it up in terms of blockchain. It's such a disruptive technology around disintermediation, um, that I think that may come to be true, a true statement. So I kind of like that one.
Absolutely, Bill. Like disintermediation in all stuff. Like there is Web 3.0 protocol that's trying to decentralize web. There is Bitcoin that is decentralizing money. Ether that is decentralizing finance. There is information getting decentralized. So probably that's the theme that I loved it. Means it was amazing.
Yeah.
So thank you, Bill, for your time. I hope our learners can derive a lot of value from our discussion. We'll continue these discussions. We'll bring on few guests, right, from this space, from the crypto space, from blockchain space. And thank you for listening. Have a nice day.
Thanks, Harry.